My first love was reincarnated as the most feared Mafia boss. What happened next will shake you. A gentle barista is living a quiet life until the most dangerous man in the city walks into her cafe and calls her by a nickname no one alive should know. He looks at her like he's known her forever. He protects her like she belongs to him. But the scariest part? He dreams about a girl who died years ago. The same girl the barista used to be. Just when she tries to run, his enemies strike, dragging her into a world of guns, secrets, and a man who will burn down the city to keep her safe. And as his memories return, she starts to realize something terrifying. The sweet boy she once loved came back as a king made of violence. So now she has to ask herself if the only person who can save her is the same man who could destroy her. What does she choose? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. Through shattered glass, the last rays of dusk painted red streaks across Ray's Santori's world. One moment, he'd been reviewing reports in the back of his armored SUV. The next, chaos erupted. The crack of gunfire split the air. Metal screamed against metal. "Get down, boss!" His security chief, Marco, dove across him as bullets punched through reinforced windows, sending crystalline shards everywhere. Ray's training kicked in instantly. He dropped low, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. The convoy screeched to a halt, tires burning rubber on asphalt. Through the spider-webbed windshield, he glimpsed dark figures emerging from the tree line. His men were already returning fire, but they were outnumbered. The air grew thick with gunsmoke and screams. Blood sprayed across leather seats. The driver slumped forward, dead before his head hit the horn. Its endless wail filled the night. "We're boxed in!" Marco shouted, firing through a blown-out window. "Second vehicle is down!" Heat bloomed against Ray's face as an explosion rocked the rear SUV. Orange flames reflected in his rearview mirror, casting dancing shadows across his cold features. He'd survived dozens of attempts on his life, but something felt different this time. More coordinated, personal. A grenade bounced off the hood, rolling beneath the engine block. Time slowed to a crawl. "Out! Now!" Ray's kicked his door open, dragging Marco with him as their vehicle erupted in a fireball. The blast wave threw them clear, but pain exploded through his skull as he hit the ground hard. Through blurring vision, he saw his security team forming a protective circle, firing back at the ambushers while pulling him toward the tree line. Blood ran hot down the side of his face. Each heartbeat sent waves of agony through his head. "Stay with us, boss!" Marco's voice seemed to come from very far away. The world tilted and spun, darkness creeping in at the edges. Then another face swam into view. Not one of his men, but a teenage girl. Sunlight haloed her hair as she smiled down at him, reaching out. Her lips moved. "Ash!" The image vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving him disoriented and confused. Who was she? Why did his chest ache at the sight of her? He had no time to dwell on it. More gunfire erupted around them as his team half-carried, half-dragged him through the woods to a fallback position. Radio chatter crackled with coordinates for extraction. Everything felt distant, dreamlike. The next few hours passed in fragments. The thrum of helicopter blades, urgent voices, the sterile white halls of his estate's medical wing, doctors hovering over him, speaking in clipped tones about concussion protocols and possible traumatic amnesia. When Ray's finally clawed his way back to full consciousness, he found himself in a private recovery room, guards posted at every entrance. The digital clock on the wall read 3:17 in the morning. His head throbbed, but the pain felt far away, dulled by whatever drugs coursed through his system. Marco stepped into view, looking haggard but alert. "Boss, how are you feeling?" Ray's tried to sit up, fighting against stiff muscles. "Report. 7 dead, 4 wounded. The ambush was professional. Military-grade weapons, coordinated attack pattern. We're still running down leads." Ray's nodded, then immediately regretted the movement as pain lanced through his skull. He pressed his fingers to his temples, trying to sort through the fog in his mind. Names and faces that should have been crystal clear felt maddeningly out of reach. "The doctor said temporary memory loss is normal with this type of head trauma," Marco continued. "It should clear up in, leave me." Ray's tone left no room for argument. Marco hesitated only a moment before bowing slightly and backing out of the room. The door clicked shut, leaving Ray's alone with his scattered thoughts. He closed his eyes, trying to focus. Most of his memories felt intact, if slightly blurred. Business dealings, territory negotiations, enemy movements. But personal details kept slipping away like smoke through his fingers, and always that girl's face kept floating back to him, more vivid than anything else. Who was she? The name she'd called him, Ash, stirred something deep in his chest, an ache he couldn't explain. It felt important, vital even, but the connection danced just beyond his grasp. Unable to rest, Reyes pulled out his IV and stood carefully. His legs were steady enough. He found his clothes folded nearby, black suit stained with blood and gunpowder residue. The familiar weight of his shoulder holster helped ground him. The halls of his mansion were silent, save for the soft footsteps of patrolling guards. They nodded respectfully as he passed, knowing better than to question their boss's movements, even in his current state. He wandered without real purpose, past priceless artwork and antique furnishings that suddenly felt meaningless. Every shadow seemed to hide that girl's face. Every quiet moment carried the echo of her voice calling him Ash. Dawn found him in his private study, surrounded by intelligence reports and surveillance photos. None of the faces matched the one in his mind. Hours of searching yielded nothing but frustration and an increasingly urgent need to understand. The first rays of morning sun spilled through bulletproof windows, painting the room in soft gold that reminded him again of her smile. Something inside him shifted, clicked into place. He couldn't explain the certainty that filled him, but he knew what he had to do. Moving with silent efficiency, Reyes changed into fresh clothes and gathered a few essential items. His personal phone he left on the desk, too easily tracked. Instead, he took an untraceable burner phone and a thick stack of cash. The mansion's security was state-of-the-art, designed to keep threats out. But Reyes knew every blind spot, every gap in coverage. He'd installed the system himself. Slipping past his own guards was almost embarrassingly easy. Within minutes, he was behind the wheel of an unmarked sedan from his private garage, one of dozens kept ready for exactly this type of situation. The gate guards were changing shifts. Perfect timing for a quiet exit. As he merged onto the awakening city streets, Reyes felt a strange sense of peace, despite his confusion. The girl's face was a compass needle in his mind, pulling him forward. He had no plan, no destination, only an unshakable conviction that he needed to find her. The morning traffic began to build around him as the city stirred to life. Delivery trucks made their rounds, early commuters clutched coffee cups. None of them knew that the most dangerous man on the East Coast drove among them, chasing a memory that felt more real than the empire he'd built. Reyes had no illusions about the chaos his disappearance would cause. His captains would be scrambling, his enemies plotting. The delicate balance of power he maintained, through careful manipulation and calculated violence, could unravel in days. Yet for the first time in his remembered life, none of that seemed to matter. The only thing that felt real was the image of that girl and the name she'd called him, Ash. The word echoed in his mind like a key trying to find its lock. He drove aimlessly through the city's awakening streets, letting instinct guide him. Every young woman's face drew his attention, searching for features that matched his memory. The sun climbed higher, traffic thickened, but still he drove. His phone began vibrating. The burner, not his personal line. Marco, most likely, having discovered his absence. Reyes ignored it. His organization could run itself for a few days. He had more important matters to attend to. A pressure built behind his eyes as more fragments of memory tried to surface. The girl's face remained clear, but now he caught glimpses of other things. A school building, a baseball field, the smell of chalk dust and fresh-cut grass. None of it made sense with what he knew of his life. Hour after hour passed as he crisscrossed the city. His head throbbed, but he pushed through it. The need to find her had become almost physical, an ache in his chest that wouldn't ease. She was out there somewhere. She had answers he desperately needed. The sun climbed higher as morning stretched toward noon. Reyes' trained instincts told him he was being reckless, making himself vulnerable. But something stronger than instinct drove him now. Something that felt older than his memories, deeper than his carefully constructed identity. Who was she? Why did she call him Ash? And most importantly, why did it feel like finding her might change everything he thought he knew about himself? These questions circled in his mind as he continued his search through the waking city, a predator-turned-pilgrim, hunting not for blood but for truth. The girl's face haunted him, a ghost he couldn't shake, a mystery he had to solve, even if it meant risking everything he'd built. The morning sun painted golden stripes across the cafe's worn wooden floors as Juniper Hale flipped the sign from closed to open. She'd owned Sweet Mornings for 3 years now, and the familiar routine of opening shop still brought her joy. The scent of freshly ground coffee beans and warm pastries filled the cozy space as she hummed along to the soft jazz playing through the speakers. Her fingers traced the edge of the counter as she did her final morning checks. Everything was in its place, the glass display case gleaming with fresh baked goods, coffee machines primed and ready, syrup bottles lined up like soldiers. The morning sunlight caught the delicate string lights she'd woven around the exposed beams, making them sparkle against the exposed brick walls. The bell above the door chimed its first welcome of the day. Juniper looked up with her practiced smile, only to have it freeze on her face. A man stood in the doorway, tall enough that he had to duck slightly to enter. The rising sun cast him in shadow, but she could make out broad shoulders beneath an expensive black suit and scars, thin, silvery lines that traced one side of his jaw. He stepped inside, and Juniper's breath caught. His eyes were dark, intense, fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. Something about his gaze made her skin prickle, like static electricity before a storm. He moved with fluid grace despite his size, each step measured and deliberate as he approached the counter. Juniper forced herself to breathe normally. She'd dealt with all types of customers in her years of running the cafe, but something about this man felt different. Dangerous, yes, that was obvious in the way he carried himself, but there was something else, something that made her heart beat faster in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Welcome to..." "Sweet mornings," she managed, proud that her voice remained steady. "What can I get for you?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes roamed her face as if memorizing every detail. The intensity of his scrutiny should have made her uncomfortable, but instead it felt familiar, like déjà vu, but stronger. "Black coffee," he finally said, his voice deep and rough. "And..." He paused, something flickering across his expression. "You haven't changed at all, June Bug." The nickname hit her like a physical blow. Her hands gripped the counter's edge as memories flooded back. Summer afternoons by the lake, stolen kisses behind the bleachers, a boy with laughing eyes who only ever called her June Bug. But that boy was gone. Had been gone for 10 years since the accident that had shaped the course of her life. "What did you say?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. Something shifted in his expression, confusion perhaps, or frustration. He shook his head slightly, as if trying to clear it. "I'm sorry, I don't know why I..." He trailed off, his brow furrowing. "One black coffee." Juniper's hands shook slightly as she prepared his drink. Only Ash had ever called her Junebug. It was their special thing, a secret nickname that died with him that rainy night when they were 17. This stranger couldn't possibly know it. It had to be coincidence. But as she worked, she could feel his eyes on her, heavy with an awareness that seemed impossible. When she handed him the coffee, their fingers brushed. The contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with the hot cup between them. $3, she said, struggling to maintain professional distance despite the chaos in her mind. He placed a 20 on the counter. "Keep it." Before she could protest, he turned and walked toward the door. His movements were smooth, controlled, but there was tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there when he entered. At the threshold, he paused. For a moment, Juniper thought he might turn back, might explain, but he simply pushed through the door and disappeared into the growing morning crowd. The rest of Juniper's shift passed in a blur. The usual morning rush kept her hands busy, but her mind kept circling back to those few strange minutes. The way he'd looked at her like he was seeing a ghost. The nickname that no one else knew, the strange familiarity in his dark eyes. She tried to focus on her regular customers, the harried mothers with school-age kids, the business people tapping away on laptops, the college students with their textbooks spread across tables. But every time the bell chimed, she found herself looking up, half expecting to see him again. By closing time, clouds had gathered, turning the evening sky a deep slate gray. Juniper moved through her closing routine mechanically, her mind still stuck on the morning's encounter. As she counted the register, thunder rumbled in the distance. She gathered her things, double-checked the locks, and stepped out into the cooling air. The first drops of rain began to fall as she turned the key in the final lock. The streets were quieter now, most shops already closed, but she couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Across the street, a dark sedan sat idle, its windshield reflecting the streetlights. Through the growing curtain of rain, she couldn't make out the driver, but something about the car's presence made her pulse quicken. She pulled her jacket tighter around herself and hurried toward her own car, parked just around the corner. Inside the sedan, Ray's Santori watched her disappear into the rainy darkness. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white with tension. The coffee he'd bought that morning sat cold and untouched in the cup holder, but he couldn't bring himself to throw it away. "I found you," he whispered into the quiet car, his voice rough with emotion he didn't fully understand. The words felt right in his mouth, even as they confused him. He hadn't known he was looking for her until he saw her face, but now everything in him recognized her as the missing piece. The girl from his fractured memories, the one who had called him Ash. Rain drummed against the car roof as he sat there, trying to make sense of the connection he felt. He was Ray's Santori, feared leader of the East Coast's most powerful crime family. He had built his empire on being cold, calculating, untouchable. But seeing her had cracked something open inside him, letting loose feelings he thought he'd buried long ago. The cafe's lights went dark one by one, leaving only the glow of street lamps reflecting off the wet pavement. Still, he sat there, wrestling with memories that didn't make sense. Sunshine and laughter, the smell of chalk dust, a baseball field, and always her face, younger but unmistakably the same. Thunder rolled again, closer now, but Ray's barely noticed. His mind was caught between past and present, between who he was and who he might have been. One thing was certain. He had found her, and nothing would ever be the same. The morning sun streamed through the cafe's windows, casting long shadows across the freshly mopped floors. Juniper adjusted her apron, ready to face another day of serving coffee and pastries to the regular crowd. Everything felt normal until her boss, Marie, called her into the tiny back office. "June, I hate to do this to you," Marie said, frowning at her phone. "But Danny just called out sick. Could you close alone tonight?" Juniper's stomach tightened. She hadn't closed alone since starting here 2 years ago. "Sure," she said, forcing a smile. "I can handle it." The day dragged on endlessly. The morning rush blended into the lunch crowd, then the afternoon slump, and finally the evening wind down. By the time she started her closing duties, her feet ached and her lower back screamed for relief. Outside, the sun had already set, leaving the street in that strange twilight where shadows grew longer and deeper. Juniper double-checked the locks, shouldered her bag, and stepped out into the cooling air. The street looked different at this hour, emptier, more threatening. She had taken only 3 steps when rough hands grabbed her from behind. The world tilted sideways as someone dragged her toward the alley beside the cafe. Her bag clattered to the ground, scattering its contents across the sidewalk. The mugger's breath was hot against her neck, his grip bruising on her arms. Before she could draw breath to scream, a dark figure materialized from the shadows. One moment her attacker was pulling her backward, the next he was ripped away with devastating force. Juniper stumbled, catching herself against the brick wall. What happened next burned itself into her memory with terrifying clarity. Ray's, the mysterious customer from yesterday, moved like water, like shadow, like death itself. His fist connected with brutal precision, throat, solar plexus, knee. The mugger didn't stand a chance. In seconds, he lay crumpled on the ground, blood pooling from his nose and split lip. Ray stood over him, chest barely rising with exertion. He pulled a pristine handkerchief from his suit pocket and methodically wiped the blood from his knuckles. The casual grace of the gesture somehow made it more frightening. Then he turned to her, and everything changed. His expression softened, the deadly focus melting into concern. He crossed to her in 2 quick strides, one hand reaching up to cup her face with impossible gentleness. "Are you hurt?" His voice was soft, worried, completely at odds with the violence she'd just witnessed. Juniper couldn't reconcile the 2 versions of him, the brutal fighter and this tender protector. She shook her head, unable to find words. "Good." He bent down and gathered her scattered belongings, placing them carefully back in her bag. "I'm taking you home." That snapped her out of her daze. "What? No, I have my car." "This wasn't random," he cut in, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You were targeted because of me. I can't leave you unprotected." Fear crawled up her spine, different from the terror of the attack. "Because of you, I don't even know you." Something flickered in his dark eyes. Pain, maybe, or frustration. "Please, Junebug, let me keep you safe." That nickname again. She wanted to demand answers, but the unconscious man at their feet and the lingering adrenaline made her reconsider if someone really was targeting her. "Fine," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But I need answers." A sleek black car pulled up to the curb, though she hadn't seen him signal anyone. A man in a dark suit stepped out and opened the rear door. Ray's guided her inside with a hand at the small of her back, the touch surprisingly comforting, despite everything. The interior smelled of expensive leather. Ray slid in beside her, close enough that she felt the heat radiating from his body. As they pulled away from the curb, she noticed 2 more black cars falling into formation behind them. "Who are you?" she whispered, watching the city blur past the tinted windows. "Someone who would burn the world to keep you safe." He said it simply, like a fact rather than the earth-shattering declaration it was. The drive took them to the wealthiest part of the city, where glass and steel towers stretched toward the stars. They pulled into a private underground garage beneath one of the most exclusive buildings in town. More men in suits materialized as they stepped out of the car, forming a protective circle around them. In the elevator, Reyes pressed his thumb to a biometric scanner, then entered a code. "Penthouse," he said to her unasked question. The doors opened directly into his home, and Juniper's breath caught. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city lights. Everything spoke of wealth and power: the marble floors, the museum-quality art, the furniture that probably cost more than she made in a year. "Leave us," Reyes commanded, and the guards melted away without a word. "You'll be safe here." Juniper stood in the middle of all that luxury, feeling small and out of place in her coffee-stained work clothes. Questions crowded her mind. About the attack, about his impossible fighting skills, about the way he looked at her like she was precious and familiar. But what came out was, "Why do I feel like I know you?" Reyes' expression tightened with an emotion she couldn't name. He stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Because part of you does," he said softly. "Just like part of me has known you all along." The city lights sparkled behind him like stars, casting his sharp features in shadows and gold. Standing there in his penthouse, surrounded by evidence of his power and wealth, Juniper felt reality shift around her. Nothing made sense anymore, not the attack, not his protection, not the way her heart raced when he looked at her. She was in the lair of a dangerous man who had just beaten someone unconscious without breaking a sweat. She should be terrified. Instead, beneath the fear and confusion, something deeper stirred. Recognition, maybe. Or remembrance. The guards had withdrawn to their posts, leaving them alone in the vast space. Juniper wrapped her arms around herself, trying to process everything that had happened. The mugger's attack felt distant now, overshadowed by the mystery of the man standing before her. Reyes watched her with that same intense focus she'd noticed in the cafe, like she was a puzzle he was trying to solve. Or maybe a memory he was trying to capture. In the soft lighting of his penthouse, the scar along his jaw looked silver, a reminder that this beautiful, dangerous man had secrets she couldn't begin to understand. The leather sofa creaked softly as Juniper shifted, trying not to wince when Reyes dabbed antiseptic on her, scraped wrist. His touch was startlingly gentle for hands that had been so lethal less than an hour ago. The contrast made her head spin. "I'm sorry if I frightened you," he said, his voice low and careful. His dark eyes remained focused on her injury as he worked. "That's the last thing I want!" Juniper watched his face, searching for any hint of the violence she'd witnessed earlier. But his expression was calm, almost tender, as he wrapped a bandage around her wrist with practiced ease. "You moved like you'd done that before, the fighting." His jaw tightened slightly. "I have. Are you going to tell me who you really are?" Reyes set aside the first aid supplies and finally met her gaze. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I'm trying to figure that out myself. Since the accident..." He stopped, running a hand through his dark hair in frustration. "Things are coming back in pieces, fragments, but you're in all of them." "What do you mean, fragments?" "I see you smiling in sunlight, hear myself calling you Junebug. Feel this." He pressed a hand to his chest. "This need to keep you safe. It's like muscle memory, but deeper." Juniper's heart pounded. "That's impossible. The only person who ever called me Junebug died when I was 17. "I know it sounds crazy," he said softly. "But these memories, they're real, even if I can't explain them yet." She started to stand, but he caught her hand. "It's late. You can't go home tonight. It's not safe." "I can call a cab." "Please." The word held weight, heavy with something that sounded like fear. "Stay. Just until we figure out who's targeting you." Juniper looked around the vast penthouse, at the city lights glittering beyond the windows, at the man whose gentle touch belied the violence she'd witnessed. Everything in her screamed this was dangerous, but exhaustion and lingering fear won out. One night, relief softened his features. "I'll show you to the guest room." The bedroom he led her to was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in soft grays and blues. He brought her a t-shirt and shorts to sleep in, then hesitated in the doorway. "If you need anything..." "I'll be fine," she said quickly, needing space to think. He nodded and closed the door. Juniper listened to his footsteps retreat before changing into the borrowed clothes that smelled faintly of expensive laundry soap. The bed was sinfully comfortable, but sleep proved elusive as her mind raced with questions. When dawn finally crept through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she gave up trying to rest. The smell of coffee drew her to the kitchen, where she found Ray's at the stove, his sleeves rolled up as he flipped pancakes with surprising domesticity. "You cook?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. He glanced over his shoulder, and something in his expression softened when he saw her in his clothes. "When it matters." She sat at the marble island, watching him move through the kitchen with efficient grace. He set a steaming mug of coffee in front of her, prepared exactly how she liked it, though she hadn't told him her preference. "Lucky guess," she said, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. A shadow crossed his face. Memory. They ate in charged silence, the pancakes perfectly golden and fluffy. Juniper tried to reconcile this gentle domestic version of him with the man who had dispatched her attacker with terrifying efficiency. "I should go," she said finally, standing to take her plate to the sink. "I have work. I've already called your boss. The cafe will manage without you today." She stiffened. "You had no right." "Your safety comes first." His tone was soft, but brooked no argument. "At least until we know who's behind the attack. And how long will that take?" Instead of answering, he stepped closer, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The casual intimacy of the gesture stopped her breath. "As long as necessary." Reality crashed in then. She hurried to the elevator, jabbing the button repeatedly, but nothing happened. When she tried the stairs, she found armed guards posted at every exit. "They're for your protection," Ray's said from behind her. She whirled to face him. "They're keeping me trapped." "They're keeping you alive." He closed the distance between them, and despite her anger, she couldn't step away. "I know this isn't what you wanted, but I can't." His voice caught. "I can't lose you again." Again. The word hung between them, heavy with implications she wasn't ready to face. The day passed in a blur of nervous energy. Ray's gave her space, retreating to his office to work while she explored the penthouse, looking for ways out that didn't exist. She found a library filled with leather-bound books, a state-of-the-art gym, and enough art to fill a small museum. Everything spoke of wealth and power, wielded with exquisite taste. As sunset painted the sky in flames, she stood on the balcony, hands gripping the glass railing. The city sprawled below, beautiful and unreachable. She'd stepped into a world she never asked to enter, drawn into the orbit of a man who moved like violence, but touched her like she was made of glass. The balcony door whispered open behind her. She didn't turn, but she felt Ray's presence like a physical thing. He remained in the doorway, watching, the space between them charged with unspoken words. She could feel his fear, not of her, but for her. Fear that she would run the moment he loosened his grip. Fear that whatever connection sparked between them would slip away like smoke. The sun sank lower, painting them both in golden light. Juniper stood at the edge of his world, knowing she should be desperate to escape. Instead, she found herself wondering about the memories he claimed to have, about the way he said her nickname like a prayer, about the tenderness that seemed to surprise even him. She felt rather than heard him step closer, but he stopped, just short of touching her. Even now, he was giving her what space he could while keeping her in his gilded cage. The city lights began to flicker on below them, stars being born in the growing darkness. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them like a living thing, full of questions she wasn't sure she wanted answered. Because deep down, beneath the fear and confusion, something about his presence felt familiar, like a half-remembered dream, or an echo of something she'd lost long ago. The last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, leaving them in the soft glow of the city below. Juniper wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the gentle evening breeze and the weight of Ray's gaze on her back. She was trapped in his world now, caught between the man who claimed to remember her and the mystery of why anyone would want to hurt her. Behind her, Ray's remained motionless in the doorway, a sentinel keeping watch. His silence spoke volumes of patience, of determination, of a possessiveness that should have frightened her more than it did. As night settled over the city, Juniper realized she was balanced on a knife's edge between two worlds. The safe, simple life she'd built for herself seemed to be slipping away, replaced by something darker and more complex. The breeze carried the scent of his cologne to her, subtle and expensive, mixing with the city air. She closed her eyes, trying to sort through the chaos of her thoughts, but all she could focus on was his presence behind her, solid and unwavering, like he would stand there forever if that's what it took to keep her safe. The city lights blurred beyond the penthouse windows as Juniper paced the living room. Her skin crawled with the need to escape, to breathe air that wasn't filtered through Ray's protection. The designer clothes he'd offered sat untouched on the pristine couch. She wouldn't accept them. "I need my own things," she said, turning to face him. He stood by his desk, jacket discarded, sleeve rolled up to reveal intricate tattoos that disappeared beneath crisp white fabric. "If you want me to stay, I need to go home first." His jaw tightened. "It's not safe." "Then come with me." She lifted her chin, meeting his dark gaze. "I'll come back if you let me choose to, but I won't be a prisoner in borrowed clothes." Something shifted in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition of the steel in her spine. He studied her for a long moment before nodding once. 20 minutes. We go now before it gets later." The elevator ride down was tense with unspoken words. 4 armed men waited in the garage, surrounding a sleek black SUV. Ray's opened the door for her himself, his hand hovering near, but never touching her back. The gentle consideration of it twisted something in her chest. The drive to her apartment took 15 minutes through empty streets. Ray sat beside her in the back, close enough that she felt the heat of him, far enough that she could breathe. His men followed in a second vehicle, their headlights steady in the rearview mirror. "Thank you," she said softly, watching familiar buildings slide past. "For listening." He turned to her, shadows playing across the harsh planes of his face. "I don't want to cage you, Junebug. I want to keep you alive." The childhood nickname still sent shivers down her spine. Only Ash had ever called her that, and he was 15 years dead. Before she could respond, they pulled up to her building. Something was wrong. She knew it the moment they stepped into the hallway. A stillness that shouldn't be there, a door that wasn't quite closed. Her door. "Stay back," Ray's ordered, but she was already moving forward, pushing past him to see. Her home was destroyed. The small table where she ate breakfast lay shattered. Books torn apart, pages scattered like broken wings. Her photos smashed, glass crunching under her feet as she stepped inside. Someone had systematically demolished everything she owned. A sound escaped her throat. Not quite a sob, not quite a scream. Behind her, Ray's went very, very still. "They touched your home." His voice was soft, deadly. When she turned to look at him, his face had transformed into something terrible and beautiful, like an avenging angel carved from marble. "They won't touch you." His men spread through the apartment, checking rooms with practiced efficiency. Juniper stood in the middle of her ruined living room, arms wrapped around herself, trying to breathe through the panic clawing at her throat. Ray's appeared at her side, close enough to catch her if she fell, but not touching. "Pack what you can, quickly!" She moved on autopilot, grabbing a duffel bag from her closet. Clothes, toiletries, the few unbroken photos she could salvage. Her hands shook as she collected the pieces of her life. In her bedroom, she found her jewelry box untouched, the one thing they hadn't destroyed. Inside lay the only thing she had left of Ash, a simple silver chain with a tiny sunflower pendant. She clutched it tight, remembering another boy's hands fastening it around her neck on her 16th birthday. "June!" Ray's voice was gentle now. "We need to go." She nodded, zipping the bag closed. When he reached for it, she let him take it, too numb to protest. His other hand found hers in the darkness, warm and solid, anchoring her to reality. The drive back was silent. Juniper stared out the window, the pendant burning a hole in her palm. She had no safe place left. No home to return to. Nothing except the dangerous man beside her who looked at her like she was something precious and breakable. Back in the penthouse, she finally found her voice. "I'll stay," she said, watching him set her bag down carefully. "But we need rules." He went still, watching her with those unreadable eyes. "I'm not your prisoner," she continued. "When it's safe, I leave if I want to. I keep my job. And you tell me the truth about who's after me, about why you know things you shouldn't, about everything." Agreed. He said it without hesitation, like he'd give her anything she asked for. "But you accept my protection. No going anywhere alone, and you stay here until I'm certain you're safe." She nodded, too exhausted to argue further. "The guest room?" "Down the hall, left side. Everything you need should be there." He hesitated, then added softly, "I'm sorry about your home." The sincerity in his voice nearly broke her. She turned away before he could see her tears, walking quickly to the room he'd indicated. It was beautiful, of course, all cream and gold, with a bed big enough to get lost in. She closed the door and sank onto the mattress, still clutching Ash's pendant. Hours passed. She lay in the dark, listening to the quiet sounds of the penthouse settling, And beyond that, steady footsteps, back and forth, like a caged animal. Ray's, pacing the hallway outside her door. She should have been terrified, should have been planning her escape. Instead, she found herself oddly comforted by the sound of his vigilance. Whatever else he might be, whatever darkness lived in him, he was standing guard over her sleep. The pendant warmed against her skin as she finally put it on. Outside, the footsteps continued their restless pattern. Juniper closed her eyes, surrounded by luxury she never wanted, protected by a man she couldn't trust but couldn't quite fear anymore. Ray's pacing never stopped. All night, he moved like a shadow beyond her door, keeping watch while she drifted in and out of uneasy dreams. His presence was both unsettling and reassuring. A dangerous man appointed himself her guardian, and she wasn't sure if she was his guest or his prisoner. The silk sheets whispered against her skin as she turned over, watching moonlight paint patterns on the ceiling. Every time she started to drift off, she saw her destroyed apartment, felt the violation of someone touching her private space. Then she'd hear Ray's footsteps again, and something in her would settle, knowing he was between her and whatever threat waited in the darkness. The night stretched endlessly, filled with the quiet sounds of his movement and her thoughts. Tomorrow would bring questions she wasn't ready to face, truths she might not want to hear. But for now, she lay in this gilded cage, listening to her protector's restless vigil, wondering how she'd gone from a simple life-serving coffee to being guarded by a man who moved like violence but touched her like she was made of starlight. Sunlight crept through unfamiliar curtains as Juniper blinked awake, her body heavy from restless sleep. The silk sheets felt foreign against her skin, a constant reminder that she wasn't in her own bed. For a moment, she lay still, orienting herself in the luxurious guest room of Ray's penthouse. The events of yesterday crashed back. Her destroyed apartment, the forced relocation, Ray's endless pacing outside, her door. Speaking of which, the hallway was finally quiet. She pushed herself up, running fingers through tangled hair as savory scents drifted under her door. Following the smell of coffee and something cooking, she padded down the hallway in borrowed pajamas that probably cost more than her monthly rent. She found Ray's in the kitchen, his broad back turned to her as he stood at the stove. The domestic scene felt surreal. A dangerous man in a fitted black t-shirt making what looked like French toast. "Good morning," she said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned and her breath caught at the intensity of his gaze. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. He clearly hadn't slept either. "June," he said, like her name was something precious. "Sit. Coffee's ready." She settled at the marble island, watching him pour her a cup with careful precision. Everything he did was measured, controlled. Even the simple act of hospitality felt weighted with unspoken meaning. "You didn't have to cook again," she said, wrapping her hands around the warm mug. "I wanted to." He plated the French toast, adding fresh berries with meticulous care. "You need to eat." The breakfast was delicious, but tension threaded through every bite. Ray's barely touched his own food, instead watching her with that unnervingly focused stare, like he was memorizing her features, afraid she might disappear. After breakfast, he gave her a proper tour of the penthouse. The space was massive, taking up the entire top floor of the building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning city views, while the interior dripped with understated wealth, original artwork, custom furniture, rare books lining built-in shelves. "The security system is state-of-the-art," he explained, showing her the control panel. "Every entrance is monitored. The windows are bulletproof." He hesitated. "I know it feels like a cage, but it's meant to keep threats out, not you in." She wasn't sure she believed that, but she nodded. "And the guards?" "Necessary." His jaw tightened. "2 will accompany you whenever you leave. They'll be discreet, but they don't take orders from anyone except me." Throughout the day, he introduced her to key members of his security team. Marco and Daniel would be her primary guards, both former military, both utterly professional. They kept a respectful distance, but watched her every move with hawk-like focus. Ray's himself seemed unable to stay far from her. As she explored the penthouse, he orbited nearby, finding endless excuses to be in whatever room she occupied. His presence should have been suffocating, but something about it felt familiar, like muscle memory responding to an old dance partner. Evening brought a formal dinner served by his private chef. Juniper picked at the expertly prepared meal, too distracted by questions burning in her throat. Finally, as they sat with untouched dessert between them, she gathered her courage. "Tell me about your past," she said, quietly. "You called me Junebug. Only one person ever used that name, and he died when I was 17. Ray set down his fork with deliberate care. "I wish I could tell you more. Most of my memories are fractured, missing. his fingers clenched around his water glass. I remember fragments, sunshine through leaves, your laugh, calling you Junebug, but the context, the full pictures, they're gone. How? Why? The accident last week, head trauma. His voice roughened. Before that, I knew who I was, what I've done. Now there are holes. But you, he looked at her with desperate intensity. You're the clearest thing in my mind, the only thing that feels real. She wanted to press further, but something in his expression stopped her. Raw vulnerability leaked through his careful control, and she realized how much it cost him to admit these gaps in his memory. They parted for the night with questions still hanging heavy between them. Juniper tried to sleep, but found herself staring at the ceiling, mind racing with possibilities she didn't want to examine too closely. The sound jerked her awake hours later, a cry of distress from down the hall. She sat up, heart pounding, listening. Another sound, this time clearly Ray's voice twisted with panic. She shouldn't go to him. The smart thing would be to stay safely in her room. But that broken sound pulled at something deep in her chest, and before she could think better of it, she was padding down the hallway. His bedroom door was cracked open. She hesitated, then pushed it wider. Moonlight spilled across his massive bed, illuminating Ray's thrashing form. Sweat gleamed on his bare chest as he fought invisible demons. "Junebug!" he muttered, voice cracking. "Don't go! Please don't go!" The naked pain in his voice shattered her hesitation. She approached the bed carefully, keeping her movement slow. "Rays," she called softly. "Wake up! You're having a nightmare." His eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused. For a terrifying moment, she thought he might lash out. Then recognition flooded his face, followed by such raw relief it made her chest ache. "June!" He reached for her like a drowning man seeking anchor. "You're here? You're real?" "I'm here." She perched carefully on the edge of his bed. "You were having a bad dream." He shuddered, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. "Sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "It's okay." Without thinking, she touched his shoulder. His skin burned hot under her fingers. The contact seemed to break something in him. He curled forward, pressing his face against her knee like a child seeking comfort. His whole body trembled. "I keep seeing you disappear," he whispered. "Keep trying to reach you, but you're always just out of reach." Her heart twisted. Whatever else he was, whatever violence lived in his hands, right now he was just a man fighting his demons. She stroked his hair, feeling him gradually relax under her touch. "I'm right here," she murmured. "I'm not going anywhere." He shifted, laying his head in her lap. The position should have felt intimate, dangerous. Instead, it felt like muscle memory, like something they'd done 1,000 times before. She continued running gentle fingers through his hair, feeling his breathing slowly even out. Minutes stretched into hours. Moonlight crept across the floor as Ray's finally drifted into peaceful sleep, his massive frame curled trustingly against her. Juniper knew she should leave, should maintain the careful boundaries between them. But something kept her there, something beyond logic or self-preservation. Looking down at his sleeping face, stripped of its usual guarded expression, she couldn't see him as just the dangerous stranger who'd upended her life. The way he'd reached for her, the way he whispered her childhood nickname like a prayer, it meant something. She just wasn't sure she was ready to face what that meaning might be, so she sat in the darkness, being whatever anchor he needed, while questions multiplied in her mind. Who was he, really? How did he know things about her that only Ash had known? And why did comforting him feel as natural as breathing? She had no answers, but as Ray slept peacefully against her shoulder, one thing became crystal clear. She couldn't simply dismiss him as a stranger anymore. Whatever connection existed between them, whatever history lay buried in his fractured memories, it was too real to deny. Dawn's first light crept through the penthouse windows as Juniper carefully extracted herself from beneath Ray's sleeping form. Her legs had gone numb hours ago, but she'd stayed, unwilling to disturb his first peaceful sleep since she'd arrived. Now, watching the powerful man curled vulnerable on his massive bed, she felt an unsettling mix of tenderness and fear. She tiptoed back to her room, heart thundering with each soft footfall. The morning air felt charged, like the calm before a storm. She couldn't process what had happened, how natural it felt to comfort him, how his broken whispers of "Junebug" had shattered something inside her. Hours later, after a tense breakfast where neither mentioned the night's events, Juniper sat cross-legged on her bed with her laptop. Ray's had stepped out for business, leaving her alone except for the ever-present guards. She opened a browser window and typed with trembling fingers, Ash Morales, accident 2006. The search results made her chest ache. Local news articles detailed the fiery crash that had claimed her first love's life. She clicked through them, scanning familiar words that still felt like knives. Heroic teenager, saved girlfriend, explosion. One article included a grainy photo of 17-year-old Ash, his bright smile forever frozen in time. Juniper minimized the browser, unable to look at that smile any longer. But questions nagged at her. She'd noticed things about Ray's, little gestures, expressions, the way he said certain words. That reminded her of Ash. She'd dismissed these as grief playing tricks on her mind. Now she wasn't so sure. Her fingers shook as she dug through her purse, pulling out the worn leather wallet she'd carried since high school. Behind her driver's license was a folded photograph, creased from years of handling. She smoothed it carefully on the bedspread. 2 teenagers grinned up at her from the faded image. Her younger self, wearing a sundress and an impossibly wide smile, and Ash, tall and lean, looking at her like she hung the moon. She studied his features, the sharp jaw, the slight curve of his lips, the intensity in his dark eyes. Rising on unsteady legs, she carried the photo to the mirror. Holding it up, she compared Ash's face to her memory of Ray's. The bone structure was different. Ray's features were harder, marked by years and violence. But there was something in the eyes, in the way they crinkled at the corners. A chill raced down her spine. She dropped the photo like it burned. "Impossible," she whispered to her pale reflection. "You're losing your mind." The sound of the front door opening made her jump. She quickly tucked the photo away as Ray's heavy footsteps approached. He appeared in her doorway, his usual imposing presence somehow softened by the concern in his eyes. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. He studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "I need to tell you something. Will you join me for dinner?" Hours later, they sat across from each other at his elegant dining table. The city lights sparkled beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, but tension crackled in the space between them. Ray's pushed his barely touched food around his plate. "The memories are getting clearer," he finally said, his deep voice unusually hesitant. "Not everything. There are still huge gaps, but certain things." He trailed off, gripping his fork so tightly his knuckles went white. Juniper waited, barely breathing. "I remember your laugh," he continued softly. "The way it would bubble up from nowhere, like sunshine breaking through clouds. I remember summer air thick with jasmine, and your hand in mine as we walked home from school." Juniper's chest constricted. Those were her memories with Ash. Precious moments she'd kept locked away for years. "There's more." Ray's voice roughened. "I remember fire, metal screaming, you screaming. I remember choosing—" He broke off, drawing a ragged breath. "Choosing to let go, to make sure you survived." The fork clattered from Juniper's numb fingers. She pressed her hands against her mouth, trying to hold back a sob. "My first love died saving me," she whispered through her fingers. "He pushed me out of a car right before it exploded. I watched him." Her voice cracked. "I watched him burn." Ray's rose from his chair, moving around the table with fluid grace. He knelt beside her, reaching up to brush tears from her cheek with calloused fingers. "I feel like I've known you for lifetimes," he murmured, his touch impossibly gentle. "Like every time I look at you, I'm remembering something I was never supposed to forget." Juniper stared into his eyes, dark and intense, just like in the photograph upstairs, just like in her memories. The possibility was too enormous, too terrible to contemplate. She fled to her room, locking the door behind her. Sinking to the floor, she pressed her fist against her mouth to muffle her sobs. Everything she thought she knew about life and death and loss was unraveling. If Ray's memories were real, if he was somehow, impossibly, her Ash, the implications terrified her. Because the boy she'd loved had been gentle, kind, incapable of violence. But Ray's, she'd seen the blood on his knuckles, the cold calculation in his eyes. If he was truly Ash reborn, what did that mean about fate, about second chances, about the price of coming back? Tears fell silently as questions without answers circled in her mind. Outside her door, she heard Ray's quiet footsteps pause, then continue their endless patrol of the hallway. Guarding her, even now, even from himself. She curled tighter around her knees, feeling like that terrified 17-year-old girl all over again, watching someone she loved disappear in flames. Only this time he'd come back as something darker, more dangerous. and she didn't know if that was a miracle or a curse. The night stretched endless before her, full of memories she couldn't trust and revelations she wasn't ready to face. Somewhere in the darkness, a clock ticked steadily forward, counting down to a truth that would change everything. Sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows as Juniper woke, her determination crystallizing like frost. She had to know who Reyes really was, the gentle soul who cooked her breakfast, or the dangerous man who commanded an empire. She found him in his office, speaking in low tones with a sharp-featured man she hadn't met before. Both men turned as she entered, Reyes' face softening, while his companion's eyes narrowed with clear suspicion. "Junebug," Reyes said softly. "This is Marco Vitali, my consigliere." Marco's handshake was cold, professional. "Miss Hale, your presence here is unexpected." She caught the underlying message. Unwanted. But she lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated. "I'd like to understand more about what you do," she told Reyes. "If I'm stuck here, I should know why." Throughout the day, she shadowed their meetings, watching Reyes navigate complex negotiations and territory disputes. Marco kept shooting her worried glances, especially when Reyes' tone grew gentler around her. During a brief moment alone, Marco cornered her. "You're changing him," he said, voice tight with concern. "Making him soft when we need him strong." "Maybe he needs both," she countered. Evening descended, and Reyes announced they needed to check security at one of his nightclubs. The streets gleamed with recent rain as their convoy of black SUVs moved through the city. Juniper sat beside Reyes, watching streetlights play across his scarred knuckles on the steering wheel. The attack came without warning. Glass exploded inward as bullets tore through their vehicle. Reyes moved with inhuman speed, shoving Juniper down while drawing his weapon. She caught glimpses through her fingers, his men emerging from other vehicles, muzzle flashes in the darkness, the wet sound of bodies hitting pavement. Reyes stepped out of the car, and everything changed. Gone was the man who touched her with such gentleness. This was a predator, moving with lethal grace as he systematically eliminated threats. She watched, horrified and mesmerized, as he executed attackers with brutal efficiency. Each shot precise, each movement calculated. When the last attacker fell, Reyes turned back to her. Blood streaked his jaw, his eyes cold and feral. But as soon as he saw her trembling, something shifted. He reached for her with the same careful tenderness she'd grown used to, helping her from the car. She surprised herself by clinging to him, pressing her face against his chest as surviving attackers fled into the night. His heart thundered against her cheek as he wiped blood from his face with his sleeve. "Get us back to the penthouse," he ordered his men, voice rough. "Now!" The ride home was silent, heavy with unspoken words. In the elevator, Reyes finally spoke. "I'm sorry you had to see that," he said quietly. "That side of me? It's not something I wanted you to witness." Juniper studied his profile, seeing both versions of him overlapped. The killer and the protector, the monster and the man. Without thinking, she reached up to touch his cheek, feeling him freeze under her fingers. "I think I've seen you before," she whispered. "Both versions of you. The gentle boy who loved me and the dangerous man who would kill to keep me safe." His breath caught. Outside, the city sparkled like scattered diamonds beneath a velvet sky. They moved to the balcony, drawn by some magnetic pull neither could resist. "How can you even look at me?" he asked roughly. "After what you saw?" "Because I see all of you," she answered. "The darkness and the light." They stood too close now, the space between them charged with electricity. His hands settled on the railing on either side of her, caging her in. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell the lingering traces of gunpowder and expensive cologne. Their breaths mingled in the cool night air. Juniper tilted her face up, drawn by the intensity in his dark eyes. The city hummed far below, but up here, time seemed suspended, waiting for one of them to bridge the final distance. Reyes' gaze dropped to her parted lips. His fingers tightened on the railing as he leaned closer, close enough that she could feel the tremor running through his powerful frame. The tension pulled taut between them like a wire about to snap. The night air crackled with electricity as they stood on the balcony. Reyes' hand trembled when he cupped Juniper's face, his thumb tracing her bottom lip. Their first kiss was gentle, hesitant, until it wasn't. Heat blazed between them as years of buried longing surfaced. Later that night, his screams woke her again. Without hesitation, Juniper slipped into his bedroom, finding him tangled in silk sheets, face contorted in anguish. She climbed into his bed, pulling him close. "I'm here," she whispered, stroking his damp hair. His powerful body shuddered against hers. "Junebug," he breathed, clinging to her like a drowning man. "I think I was born again, just to find you. Everything before you feels like darkness." The next 2 days passed in a haze of careful touches and shared breaths. They took breakfast on the balcony, her feet in his lap as he read reports. During dinner, his hand would find hers under the table. At night, she'd curl against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. But on the third night, Marco's urgent arrival shattered their bubble. Juniper was heading to the kitchen when she heard voices from Ray's office. "The Moretti family made their move," Marco said. "They're targeting her to break you. They know she's your weakness." Juniper pressed against the wall, heart pounding. "I don't care what it costs," Ray's growled. "I'll burn the city to the ground for her." The raw violence in his voice made her blood run cold. She thought of the gentle boy who died saving her, now reborn into this dangerous man willing to destroy everything to protect her. Tears filled her eyes as she quietly returned to his bedroom, gathered her things, and retreated to her own room. She couldn't let him become a monster for her. Not again. Sunlight streamed through the library windows as Juniper curled deeper into the leather armchair, pretending to read. She'd been avoiding Ray's all morning, her heart heavy with the violence she'd overheard last night. The book trembled in her hands. "He's not who you think he is." Marco's voice cut through her thoughts. She hadn't heard him enter. "What do you want?" Juniper asked, closing her book. Marco's face was hard with contained fury. "You need to know the truth about Ray's. Before his amnesia, he ordered hits that destroyed entire families, including the Morales family." The room spun. "What?" "Your precious Ash. Ray's gave the order that killed his parents. Territorial cleansing. Didn't know he was destroying his own past life's family." Juniper's chest caved in. Bile rose in her throat as Marco's words shredded her world. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Tears blurred her vision. That's how Ray's found her, sobbing, broken. "June?" His voice was soft, concerned. "You killed them," she choked out. "Ash's family, my second family, you murdered them." Recognition flickered in Ray's eyes. Then something shifted, darkness flooding in as memories cascaded. His face turned to stone, eyes going cold and dead. "Business is business," he said flatly. "I don't apologize for past decisions." Juniper stumbled backward, her heart shattering at this stranger wearing Ash's face. She ran, vision swimming with tears, past the guards, into the elevator, through the lobby. She burst onto the street, gasping for air, and strong arms grabbed her from behind. A cloth pressed against her face, sweet chemical smell flooding her senses. The last thing she saw was a black van with tinted windows before everything went dark. Ray's burst into the library, finding only Marco's smug expression. His world tilted when he realized Juniper was gone. The careful control he'd maintained shattered like glass. "The Morettis have her," Marco admitted, stepping back from the fury in Ray's eyes. "I told her what you did to the Morales family." Everything crashed back at once, memories flooding his mind like a broken dam. Being Ash, loving Juniper, dying for her, becoming Ray's, ordering the deaths of his own past family. The truth crushed his heart, but rage quickly replaced pain. He slammed Marco against the wall, snarling, "Call everyone! Tonight we end the Morettis. If she's hurt, no one survives." Gunshots echoed through the warehouse as Ray's cut through the Moretti soldiers like a vengeful shadow. Blood splattered across concrete floors while his men secured each section. His heart thundered with every step, driven by one purpose: reaching Juniper. He found her in a back room, tied to a chair but mercifully alive. Purple bruises marked her cheek, and rage burned through his veins at the sight. Without hesitation, he crushed her against his chest, her sobs muffled against his shirt. "I've got you," he whispered, voice raw. "You're safe now." At the safe house, after the doctors checked her injuries, Juniper faced him with tears in her eyes. "Who are you going to be, Ray's? The monster who ordered those deaths or the boy who loved me enough to die for me?" His carefully built walls crumbled. "I've lived 2 lives of violence," he admitted, dropping to his knees before her. "But in both, I only ever loved you. I'll tear down everything I built if it means keeping you safe." Over the next weeks, Ray's dismantled the darker parts of his empire, restructuring it with Juniper by his side. The penthouse became their sanctuary, rebuilt stronger and safer. One evening on their balcony, Juniper leaned back against his chest as the sun set. Ray's pressed his lips to her hair, whispering, "In every life, I find you." She smiled, knowing they had rewritten his destiny together. their future stretched before them, finally unbound by the past. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.